James Mirtle is here to discuss some rumors, most likely outcomes, and some of the biggest off-season questions for the Blue Jays. What's up, James? How we doing, buddy?
Yeah, what a nice little break we get here. 24 hours before we get right into everything else?
I prefer it this way.
You do? You like it all condensed
Hell
like
yeah.
this?
I know the teams hate it. The teams don't like it. But I think the media members, like yourself, who would like to be able to, you disappear to a cottage, you got a lot of money, you're the senior managing editor of The Athletic, you get to just basically go away on vacation for 2 months. The grinders out here, like myself, we still have to do the other sports. We still got to work. But for you and, the rest of the hockey elites, you get to basically disappear for a couple months. But yeah, no, I love it. I like keeping the momentum from the Cup final, having what we just saw fresh in our minds, and then being able to roll right into the draft and then right into trade season, right into the free agency period. Just have it all condensed. I love it. It's the best.
So you like the Cup final being given out, or the Cup being given out on June 24th? Does that work for you?
Yeah, this one was a little later, right? Like, sure, it was a bit later than maybe we're accustomed to, but I was fine with it. I got no problem with it. I like sports. Sports being around is not an issue for me. I don't like sports in July and August. Those are the ones where I'm like, I just want this to be dead baseball season. I don't need free agency kicked deeper into that period. Like, once we finish that first week of July and knowing this summer that we just got to kick back, watch some soccer, and then maybe root for a Blue Jays tank and tear down. I'm good with that until football.
We got Summer Olympics too. There's gonna be,
Yeah, Canada basketball. Trust me, I'm going to be very, very invested in that. Okay, so let's start with this.
Ahead.
Let's start with this. Let's get it out of the way, all right? Because I think that there's a ton of actual interesting things to talk about with this team, and there's a few things around the edges, but we got to start with the Marner domino because I think it's pretty clear and obvious that it's the number one domino for the Leafs this offseason. There's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of insiders staking their claims on what's going to happen, and we've got an insider off. What is your read on what happens with Mitch Marner?
I think that my read is that the Leafs in a perfect world would like to move him and find something that works, but my read is that that's going to be a real challenge for them. And it has been a challenge so far in terms of finding a dance partner that can line up all of the pieces that need to be lined up in order for that to happen. And there's so many different things there where, it's got to be a team that's got cap space. It's got to be a team that has assets that they want to trade. It's got to be a team that wants to extend Marner. And ultimately, it's going to have to be a team that Marner is going to waive the no move for. And at this point, I'll be surprised if it happens. And that's just that's not someone saying it's not going to happen. It's just everything I can tell from what I've heard from what's going on is it's been a struggle, and I think it's going to be a real struggle to get it done.
So if it is a struggle to get it done, do you think that the Leafs pivot and say, you know what, we have no choice. We got to try to at least broach the discussion of a contract extension?
I'd be surprised, but
yeah,
I think they'll have to regroup after they get through free agency and see where they're at.
Sorry, finish your thought.
Don't you need the season to play out though? Like, don't you need to see
of course
if the result is different? Like, I don't think you can extend now because I don't know. They're stuck. Like, if they wanted to make this move, they had to do it last year. That's the ultimate. That's where they're at. They're stuck.
So I think that they're stuck too. Here's my only case for the re-signing of Mitch Marner is if you are dead set that he is going to leave, then you should be willing to take a haircut on the trade. Like when we're talking about, when you say the assets, right? And it seems pretty clear that at this point anyways, that Toronto is very much not going to, quote, give Mitch Marner away. And I think that makes sense because they look at their group and they say, hey, we still are in the winning business and we still do have these years of Austin Matthews under contract and we're in his prime. We're not going to just materially take a massive step back. So part of me goes, all right, fine. But if you're trying to build this out for the future, I don't understand the idea of Toronto essentially trying to get back a win-now player on the roster and, prospect capital potentially or draft pick capital potentially, like really needing to feel as though they got a haul for this trade. I do think that there is some kind of a happy median here if you think that he is just going to walk for nothing, and that this story, and I don't feel as though enough people have brought this up, that people can talk all they want about how, Mitch Marner wants to have a redemption arc. This hanging over the season is not good. Look how it was with William Nylander's contract. It was the only thing we talked about until he signed the extension, and then it was the only thing that we talked about for weeks after. And I just don't see a reality where a guy who is hyper aware of media and narratives around him is going to be able to walk into a season without a contract extension with the ire of a fan base, and that it's not going to have some kind of resonance without the rest of the group. To me, I just think that if you're not going to resign him, and that really is off the table for you as a team, which I think it kind of should be, I don't know how you don't just accept, hey, you know what? We've got to be a little bit more flexible in our asking price. And I do wonder if that happens as the week goes on, and that's why things are so quiet.
Yeah, maybe. I think you're right. I think if he comes back, it's just going to be kind of a circus right from day one of training camp, where it's going to be, And, if Marner thought it was distracting and noisy and annoying before, nothing's going to be worse than this. Is he going to get booed at the games? What? It's going to be ugly. It's going to be really ugly. And, and I think the concern too for the Leafs has to be, what people saw in that game where the superstars were kind of sniping at each other a little bit, that's going to play out over the course of a whole year. And you don't want to punt on a season just because of this. So I think you're right. I think if they have to be flexible, and maybe part of what they're looking to gain in a trade is just cap space, and then they can be even more active in free agency than they're going to be able to be. And honestly, I get it. I understand why people are afraid of losing the Marner trade, because the Leafs haven't exactly been the most smoothly run organization since there was an expansion from 6 teams to more, right? There's a lot of trauma of players leaving, and you even saw this year in the playoffs, right? The guys that are scoring big goals for them, or in the Stanley Cup final. Even the stupid stuff you feel like it's rubbed in your face when even Cody Ceci makes a beautiful tape-to-tape, 2-zone outlet pass. But the Hyman stuff, the Kadri stuff, this has been year over year where you feel like, oh man, the Leafs. Yeah, of course, right? Where it's just the Leafs screwed it up. The Leafs blew it. And here's a talent like Mitch Marner, when you put it down on just paper, right? And it looks there on paper, you go, oh, the points per game and how they compare to the best players in hockey. Even the playoff numbers. People, I think most Leaf fans, no, they're probably aware that Marner out of the core 4 leads the group in playoff points, right? That he still does have the most out of any of these guys. But when you take it off the page and you think about all those factors, it's just so hard for me to think that there's any logical reason from anyone's perspective for this to return. That the Leafs are going to somehow do better with Mitch than they could potentially do with the cap space. They so desperately need a turning of the page that I actually have come around. I've gone back and forth on it because you sound like an idiot when you say lose a trade. But I think the human element of this group and projecting what is going to happen this year, I really now believe that the case is stronger that you lose the trade, you use the cap space on other assets that maybe don't amount to the points that are going out the door, but that ultimately the refresh and the lack of attention on this one singular thing has an overarching benefit on the group. Yeah. There's the potential for it just to be really nasty and toxic and drag the rest of the group down. And I think you're right. I think they do need a turning of the page, but internally, I think that there's some conversation that maybe it's going to have to come in stages, and that next summer is like the real turning of the page, because you look at next year and that's your blank sheet. Like, they're going to have $52 million in cap space, and Tavares and Marner are off the books, and the cap's going to go up again. And, you can pretty much, you can do whatever you want next summer. Yeah. This year, it is probably the transition one.
Here's the thing, though, and this is one of my, I would say, biggest questions to ask you, if not the biggest question. So, 2025, everyone loves looking at that. I remember talking to you a year back saying that I thought this was the most likely outcome, that they were going to re-sign Nylander and that they were going to look forward and say, we just got to get to the Tavares off the books and then hopefully really squeeze him for a massive haircut and then try to transform the franchise around the 3 instead of the 4. Now I'm looking at that and going, how do you sell this team? Like, what is the selling point? And what does that do psychologically to the group if you've got Marner and Tavares, two of the most important pieces, on pending UFA deals? Like, people get worried about coaches on lame duck seasons, right? People worry about, hey, are they going to be fully invested in this team? What do you think you're going to get from those two guys? People go contract season. Oh, maybe you'll get their very best. Or the other way to look at this is that they don't feel invested with the team. They look at themselves like mercenaries. They look at themselves as not a part of the core. And you're basically what? Selling your fan base? Everyone's telling me that, okay, you can't punt. You can't trade Marner because you can't punt. You can't punt. You can't punt. And yet, from a fan interest standpoint, look at what's happened with the Blue Jays this season. Like, fan interest and real belief that there's going to be material change amongst the group and the result. I think the greatest punt you can have is returning everybody, and then your selling point is just bear with us for this season because we're all going to get to 2025 together, and then, $22 million comes off the books.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it'd be so interesting if there was data on this, but it sure feels like a lot of the Leafs fan base is just checking out until... I mean, I think even last year, a lot of them checked out until the playoffs and like, oh, let's see if this is any different. And then to do it again it's going to be painful. It's going to be painful. So I'm hoping that I'm wrong and that they're able to figure something out. And there's just because we need something different here.
Mm-hmm.
I think the players need something different. I think the fans need something different. I think management needs something different. And, all the power to them. But I don't think Craig Berube is enough change for this group. I think they need more than that.
I'm sorry to people that are trying to do that one because I like it'd be nice, but there do seem to be a lot of Leaf fans that have gone like, oh, if Berube can get Marner to play this way, or if he can get this, I'm like, I don't know, no, I don't think that this coach is going to have that much of an impact. With all due respect, I think he's going to have an impact. I don't think that he's going to be able to come in here and change the entire culture of this group. And we're going to be looking back on this saying, wow, what a smart thing to keep all these players. Now everybody's engaged with it. But what's your sense of that? Like, do you have any insight on how the front office and how upper management feel about the idea that, yeah, they're returning, the idea of returning everybody and the feeling like you could really hurt the golden goose here with the Leafs?
Not specifically on like the business side. I mean, I think that they're thinking in the front office, they're thinking of it from the hockey side, and they're worried that if it's stale and it's going to be a mess bringing everything back. I think that's the concern right now is that how do they get this group to be something more than what they were last year? And I know we're going to get into it. We're going to get off the Marner stuff, but just look at like they have challenges all over the roster and. Some of the stuff that I've heard, Elliott's been reporting that some of the teams that have tons of cap space are talking about, hey, what if we do a short deal and a higher AAV? And just like, if stuff like that starts happening in the free agent landscape, the Leafs are going to get priced out of out of the top players. And then what do you do?
Yeah.
If they can't get any of the top defensemen, then, they could end up, having to deal with the second wave. And I don't know. On paper, they could be worse than last year. So this is such an important. What do we got here? 5 days.
Yeah,
it's really going to decide what we're looking at here next year.
I think it's going to come down to maybe their hope is that there's two teams that are really interested in Marner, and that ultimately it's going to be Vegas or Nashville, and one of those two places and Toronto figuring out a Marner deal. And if it's not, I haven't heard of any other destination that it could be. I'm not even aware of whether Marner would be interested in those places, but those are the two teams that seem to be consistently coming back as, they're the ones that could be in play for this guy or that actually have a genuine interest in having him and then also giving him the second piece of it, which is the extension.
Yeah.
Do you have another team to keep an eye on?
I mean, there's the only thing, and this isn't coming from the Marner side, but it's just out there, and is kind of maybe something with the Lightning, who look like they could be.
I haven't heard that one.
They could be movers and shakers here. You know,
Point for Marner. Who says no? If salaries work, this would be great. Let's do that. I'm into that trade.
I think Tampa, it would be like a Sergachev kind of something like that.
I think you'd do that.
Yeah. You get a little bit of cap space. You get a defenseman. You know, you hope that Sergachev rebounds. Didn't have a great year, but played hurt a lot of the year. But I think the Lightning are looking at it, and potentially they lose Stamkos, and they're going to have a turning of a page there, and they want to see if they can get that team back to where they're contending and not just in that second tier.
Do you know what I understand from, and this will be the last little piece of it. The thing that I get from the Leafs vantage point when I say don't lose the trade is I actually think that they would be okay with losing the trade. They just don't want to get embarrassed. And you look at some of the potential deals out there, and if I'm them, if I'm Shanahan, I'm Tree Living, I'm thinking, you bozos, we're offering you a real top tier player. This isn't just some middling guy that you could be able to overpay in free agency. This is a bona fide regular season superstar who still has been decent in the postseason, right? Who clearly needs a change of scenery. Look at our track record in terms of some of the guys that get to leave the market and then have the weight of the world lifted off their shoulders. There is so clearly and obviously a narrative here that Mitch Marner goes somewhere, yes, to a Florida or to a Vegas or to a Texas, to somewhere far away where he has the pressure off his shoulders and he dominates and becomes one of the, hey, look how dumb this team is for even moving off this guy's stories. And so to me, I kind of understand their perspective in that from that standpoint, which is give them a fairish offer, because your chance to get Mitch Marner for a discounted price, buying a distressed asset, that's how GMs look smart. That's how you get Nazem Kadri for Tyson Barrie and a fourth liner. So do it. Be a little bit more aggressive. And the fact that organizations don't seem to be willing, and as you said, to be the ones who go, we're going to add assets and then do this. Well, you're going to wait until free agency and then try to bid for this player against a bunch of other teams? It's kind of nonsensical to me that he wouldn't be a little bit more attractive to some of these teams in terms of what they're willing to fork up.
Yeah, I just think, they're going to want 12, 13 million. And even if you do get over the hurdle of what's the trade look like, and does he want to go there, then you got to negotiate an extension too, which is, there's just so many hurdles with this thing that that's why I'm skeptical that it's even going to happen.
Okay. If it does happen though, it happens after the Leafs pay the signing bonus, right? I was curious, can the Leafs negotiate a deal where they agree to pay the signing bonus? And, how does that work? Because I'm not aware of that part of it.
You just have to wait. I haven't looked at all the particulars.
You can't agree to be don't worry, we're going to pay this, if you did it in advance.
Well, we'll just make it pay the bonus on July 1 and then execute the trade right away.
Right.
That's typically what happens.
Yeah. Okay.
So the Leafs don't have to, they could pay the bonus, I think, first thing in the morning, July 1, and then trade them that day.
Yeah.
So,
which to me seems like if it does happen, that's the only outcome, is that Toronto ends up paying that. Okay. Let's move on because, we talked about how they sell it to the fan base in 2024 without it happening. I don't think it's... I really do think if it doesn't happen, you are going to see a level of apathy that hasn't been here in quite some time. And I think it's hilarious because we just saw it with the Raptors and the Blue Jays, where they failed to take action because they were unwilling to take a discounted price on some of their players. And then guess what ended up happening? They only ended up diminishing the value of those players and then hurting where the fan base was at and hurting the interest in both of those franchises and having all the fans pissed off. And so for the Leafs to just watch it happen in their own market, in their backyard twice, and think that they're going to be somehow different. In fact, I think it's only going to be worse because most fans in this city are fans of the other two teams. And I think it's only amplified now with this happening. Is crazy, crazy, crazy stuff to me. Okay, so let's start with this. What's the number one focus for the Leafs this offseason? With or without a Mitch Marner trade, or outside of a Mitch Marner trade?
Oh, it's defense.
Yeah.
It's defense for sure. Everyone you talk to, Tree Living's trying to get defense. He's in on all the defensemen. He's talking to everybody. And so, all of the top defensemen are what they're looking at. And, I think there's some concern over where the bidding goes and what they're going to have to do. I think to get any of the top, I mean, there's like 7 or 8 probably UFA defensemen that are really interesting, but there's more teams than that are interested. So, you're going to have to either give out too much term to someone who's long in the tooth, or you're going to have to go higher on the dollars than you want to. And I think the challenge for the Leafs is they really need 2 top 4 defensemen, and getting 2 of those, whatever you want to call it, top 8 is going to be very, very difficult. So they have to at least try and get one of the best defensemen available in free agency, and then maybe try and find, someone who's more of a bargain, who's going to be able to play higher than what their contract is.
Do you think the Leafs are the front runners for Tanev, or that the Leafs are being used when it comes to Tanev to create more leverage so that he can stay in Texas, but just at a bigger number?
I don't have a great read on how much he does or doesn't want to come home, because I think that that's going to be a factor. I think that the Leafs are in the top group, and I think they're going to be really aggressive there. And I think that he's one of the ones I'm talking about where they could be willing to go longer on years or higher on dollars than people might expect for him.
Yeah. I read in your piece that they could go to 5 years. And of course, the idea there is that he doesn't play the final year and you bury it, whatever. But 34-year-old Chris Tanev getting paid until he's 39 years old. I don't care how much the cap is going up. That feels like a toughie. But yeah, then you look at it and say, well, what are your other options, right? I just think that they're going to end up with one of those guys, right? Like maybe it's not their number one target. Maybe they're not the destination spot, but that ultimately they do come away with one of the big name defensemen in free agency, because I just don't think that they have enough to work with to get things done otherwise. Like they are going to have to potentially get aggressive and sign a contract that people go, oh my God, that's not very friendly, right? That's not a very good contract. But that they're going to be one of the teams that's squeezed in a position that they have to do it. Like they have to get a Pesci, they have to get a Tanev, because the outside possibilities for them, like they don't have enough to make trades to fill it out. They don't have anything internally to fill it out.
Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, I don't. They're going to be in trouble, if they can't get one of the top, because then you're going to be left with. I mean, what are they going to do? Edmondson, and they'd have to go down into the bargain bin and just cross their fingers and try and get a defenseman during the season, which
I don't think
they tried last year and it didn't work out. So
yeah,
but the numbers that I'm hearing for Zadorov's going to get Brady Shea is the number one defenseman, and everyone's saying 7 years, $7 million or more, and that's like these aren't like marquee names. Like we're not talking about the top defensemen around the league, but we're the best of this class is they're like good number 2, number 3 defensemen, and they're gonna get 6-7 million.
Yeah, no, I think the same thing's gonna happen with the goalies. By the way, like I think the Leafs end up with Brossoit, but that the price is gonna be high. And I've been texting about this with you for a while, saying there's 2 guys. Like there's 2 goaltenders, and neither of them is like who feels good about a run with either of them, right? Like who would ever go into it and say, well, if Woll gets hurt, you'd be fine because you got Brossoit. It sucks for the Leafs because they got pinched on the goalies. It was basically like the worst case scenario where 2 teams that weren't going to deal with them traded their guys, like Ullmark on the Bruins. That wasn't going to happen, and then Calgary, who has Markstrom, that obviously they were going to make the Leafs overpay and couldn't get them to do that. And then you end up in a free agent market where there's basically 2 quality backup-ish, part-time-ish, 35% of the games kind of guys that you can go out and grab. And I just can't see how in that limited of a market, there's not at least a couple of teams that are going to be vying for their services and willing to fork up, maybe even closer to 3 on those guys.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. So the question is, do you move down to the next tier? And I think the other 2 names that are
I don't think you can.
The other 2 names who are sort of interesting are Lankinen, who has played well in Nashville the last couple of years, but again, hasn't played a lot of games, and Cam Talbot, who's going to be 37 and started quite a bit in LA last year. So the debate is do you want a guy who's old but who has played a lot of games and has been a starter regularly to come in and to share the crease with Woll, Or do you want to take? I like the bet on a Brossoit or Stolars,
You have to.
and you just cross your fingers that they've had really good results in a limited sample size. You just cross your fingers that they're one of the guys. They're like the like the Charlie Lindgren story in Washington last year, where it comes out of nowhere and has been around for a while, and everyone just thought he was a backup, and then all of a sudden, gets the chance to play more games and is good. And I think that that's possible. And so if you can get one of those guys for 2 years at $3 million, I think you do it.
I think you have to do it. You can't go down a tier. Joe Woll doesn't play hockey games. If you normally would have signed a guy, Weeks has the contract extension out there, and I don't know what you've heard on that one, but if that's closer to 3.5 than it is 4, if it's $3.5 million and it's a 3-year extension or whatever, I don't think that's a sweetheart deal, but it has real potential to be a banger for you given what he's shown when he's on the ice. Problem is he's played 39 games since 2019 professionally. Like for the Leafs, it's just, I don't know how you bank on that guy staying healthy, especially when he got hurt last year twice on nothing plays. Like they weren't the freak. Remember with Koliakovo where he would get hurt a lot, but people would go, well, look at this freak play. Look at this freak play. Woll is the opposite of that, where you go, those are as common as it gets, right? He's got to go across his crease, and that breaks him. So I just don't think that you can make a bet where he gets hurt and you're turning to Cam Talbot or complete lottery tickets. You've got to pay the price. And that's what I mean is like, I think that they're going to end up with one of those right-hand D. You mentioned Matt Roy in your article. Like there's, we know like who the guys are, right? It's going to be some combination of Pesci. I think Zadorov would be a massive overpay, and I'm kind of scared that he's the leader of these guys that they could end up getting. Tanev, it's one of those guys they for sure get, and then they overpay for one of those goalies. And it's not a crazy overpay, but those are the two things that I think they need to do, even though, again, it's free agency. You're not going to look at those contracts and go, wow, what a signing.
Yeah, and it eats. I mean, they've got about $19 million. Some of that has to go to re-signing the RFAs. So let's call it, 15, $16 million. And if you're getting the goalie for $3 million and a defenseman for $6 million, there's not a lot of money left.
Mm-mm.
There's not enough money left to do the other things they need to do. And, you can forget about bringing back Domi or Bertuzzi. I mean, you're just going to be scrambling to put another defenseman in there for who knows what, someone in the second tier. And then you're going to need to get at least one forward. They're looking at a bunch of wingers, which I find surprising. But, so I think that the perfect free agency for them is, you get a top 4 defenseman, you get a goaltender you feel like can be in a tandem, and then you need another defenseman and another forward, and you got to do it somewhat on the cheap and replace what you're losing. And I mean, say what you will about Bertuzzi and Domi, but combined they put up 90 points, and that's sort of going out the door because they're not really going to be able to bring in you're going to have to hope that Nyes and Robertson and Easton Cowan and the other pieces, you're going to have to hope they step up.
Mm-hmm. So now we can do this portion. Well, actually, no. First, before we do that with the blue line, you know what stuck out the most to me in your latest reporting?
What's that?
That Liljegren could be pricey?
Well, I think that he played almost 20 minutes a game. So I think the concern is you go to arbitration and the range of possible outcomes is kind of all over the place. I think the right number for Liljegren is around $2 million.
Yeah.
Maybe like 2.2 or something like that on a 1-year deal. And there are some contracts that players like Vince Dunn when he signed his deal in St. Louis, and like that's the kind of bridge contract that makes sense to me. But if Liljegren goes to arbitration and says, no, I'm worth more than that, is there a world where he gets closer to 3? I think it's possible.
If that happens, that's a nightmare because I would say, we're basically trying to make like what are the most likely scenarios here, right? This is the theme of today is what are the most likely outcomes in the Leafs offseason, and what's more likely with the Marner follow? What's more likely with the goaltending and the defenseman? I would say that if I had to do a bet board of most likely Leaf to be traded this offseason, Liljegren would be like the heaviest favorite by a country mile.
Yeah, I like stylistically with Berube and the fact they're bringing in other defensemen and, just what I talked about with the cap space, like they need, and I think Kampf's another one that they should look at moving out because those contracts are hurting them right now.
Yeah.
Like they need that money to do something with.
I will
They
say
don't want Logren on the third pair making $3 million.
Yeah, in Kampf's defense, I think he makes like next year something like 2.7% of the cap. It's just funny that a guy who's supposed to be able to kill penalties and be a good, solid defensive forward for you and a matchup D zone center at 2.7% of the cap, people are like, we cannot have this. And I agree. I think it did end up being a bit of an overpay. I don't think that it's crucial they move him. I think it's crucial they move Liljegren, though, because it's just he's clearly not a fit. He's not at like from top to bottom. The like very top of the organization to the very bottom, I don't see a fit. I think if you're him, you want to change the scenery. And I would imagine that given the thing you said about the 20 minutes, yeah, that another team would be happy to take a flyer on him, but that you're not going to get a lot back. Now, most likely when it comes to the forward groups, here's what I would say. It really does feel like insert one of those defensemen, insert Brossoit. Perron is a lock. You were the first to it. That's happening. Like I've never seen a player do this much media ahead of free agency in terms of just talking up the one destination. Like I don't see how that doesn't happen. And then I think it's DeBrusk, and that's the offseason, and they call it a day, and then neither of Domi or Bertuzzi return.
Yeah, but what's your blue line then? You don't have enough defensemen to fill out your lineup.
You're signing one of the top 6 right-handed guys, right? You're bringing back Edmondson because he's coming back, like I would assume, unless he gets some kind of like a big offer somewhere, which maybe he does because those guys do end up being super attractive, but then they pivot to a Lyubushkin, and then you're kind of running back essentially a very similar blue line that's got a few depth pieces like that, heavy depth pieces, and c'est tout. It really does feel like that to me.
DeBrusk could get a big-time number, though, so that's where I don't know what Perron's going to get. I wonder if he's going to want term. I mean, he's another guy he's 36.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think his ultimate market is going to be at 36 years old? Like, and who's actually going to get power play time? Like, they brought Mark Savard in here, and it's Craig Berube. I think he's basically assured to see that at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
Like, who's giving him that?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So I mean, I do think there's a fit there, and I think you know what's happening with some of the forwards is they're looking at the Leafs and they're like, why don't I go there on a short-term deal? I'm going to play with really great players at the top of the lineup, and what I've heard from some is they're going to be willing to take a bit less up front because they see an opportunity there.
Yeah. Which makes sense. And I think that's Toronto's best play for some of these guys. And I think that's actually kind of the DeBrusk play is that he ends up playing this one out kind of similar to what Bertuzzi did last offseason. That maybe it's a 2-year deal, maybe it's like a bunting style deal where he takes like a good chunk of money, but that he's not on term. And he comes here and knows that he's going to get to play top 6. He's going to get to play with good players. He might get power play time. Like that's the case for him. But I think out of all the forwards, he's still the most likely guy to be here, no? Out of the bigger name guys, like I think that he almost has more of a shot now than Domi and Bertuzzi.
DeBrusk or Perron? Who are we talking about here?
DeBrusk. Perron, like I said, I've already Perron's in pen on the roster to me.
I don't know if you can fit all that in. I'd have to Pridham's going to have to really. I guess if you move Liljegren out,
Liljegren's out in this scenario.
And you go real cheap on an Edmondson or someone like that on defense, then
you are.
Then maybe you're getting in with like a 20-player roster. You could make that work. But if DeBrusk I think DeBrusk could get priced out of the Leafs, though. That's the only thing. Like I think he could get $6 million somewhere.
Yeah,
and I don't think he's worth that.
No, if he gets $6 million, then that's not happening. The premise here is that's not
well,
the contract.
He's gonna get 5 for sure.
Yeah, so somewhere there. That's kind of what I thought was like 4 or 5 to 5, somewhere in that on a 2-year deal for that guy. And you kick the ball moving forward. But otherwise, then no, go back to the Bertuzzi well and see what he's doing.
I think that well is dry, my friend.
Yeah.
I think that well is ended up somewhere else. Part of what's happening part of why I think players are going to be willing to go shorter term is they look at the cap and they're like, the cap's going to be $100 million in 2 years.
That's it.
So, it's going to be more like the NBA where I think you could see guys sign for 1-2 year deal because they know, especially depending on their age, someone like DeBrusk is relatively young. He does 2 years at a big AAV and then if he has a big 2 years, he comes up again, and it's going to be, the 5-6 million is going to look like not that much 2 years from now.
I think that it makes more sense for him than just about anywhere else, because there is, as like, he's a good player, but there's definitely a bit of rehabilitation I think that is going to happen in terms of why it didn't work out as well in Boston. Like, he wasn't, it's the Bruins, right? And you're a big power forward. Why don't they love you, right? Why aren't they obsessed with bringing you back? I think he's 27. If you're him, you could absolutely do the 2-year deal and then be up for free agency when you're 29 years old and end up cashing in and getting a ton of cash. So I think that one is the most likely of the, hey, what makes sense here for the Leafs and who's going to be willing to do that. The big one I have is, do you think Max Domi's going to wait? Like, what is his market like?
I don't know. I mean, last year they thought there was going to be more of a market, and there wasn't, and it was kind of a circle back situation. And so that's the only one that the door could remain open, because if they can't get what they want on the open market on July 1, then maybe on July 2 there's something that makes sense. But I think Domi for the Leafs, he's got to be in that 3.5 million range, and that's just not where they think they should be. So we'll see if there's something on the market there. There's a lot of interesting wingers. Like, there's some scoring. Like, the teams that really need the high end players are going to be chasing the Gensels, and I mean, we'll see if Stamkos gets to free agency or not. But Patrick Kane's out there. So I DeBrusk. I could see the numbers for someone like Domi. Like, he's not going to be at the top of anyone's list. So the question is, like, is he in the top 10 for someone? Is there someone that really wants to give him term or not?
Can I tell you something? I'm not as convinced as you that the wingers are going to get big money. Like, when you said the 6 for DeBrusk, like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, there's too many good players that play on the wing this year. Like, if there's one area that do you know where Domi ranked in points amongst free agent? This is a bit of a non-list, because there's a couple guys who played a bunch of time at center here, but he's 20th in points in terms of who's available on the wing right now. So I don't know. I don't know what the case is for him to get big money, or some of these other guys to get big money. Like,
I guess if you're Domi, you say I can play center, right? Like, that's like in the center market for UFA is not good at all.
No, it's not. And you're right. That's it. But I'm looking at it right now, this list, like, and some of these guys you'd say, can play center. A couple of them, same thing, same way. But, like, it's just, there's a lot of names that are ahead of him. And again, I have a list in front of me. I just did a quick one on my last dying days of Cap Friendly, but it's there's a couple guys on this list that are RFAs. So he's not like the pure actual 20th, but like, he finished with fewer points last season than Adam Henrique, and Henrique just did something in the postseason at the very end. Like, there's a bunch of guys on this list, like Teravainen. Are you going to give big money to him? Toffoli, like, who's getting this? Monahan, Duchesne, right? Like, I guess
Toffoli will get a lot. Toffoli's another guy that could be a 6 million guy.
Marchessault, Gensel, Stamkos, Reinhart, like, a lot. Those guys are going to eat up the money. And I do wonder if there's going to be that, or I don't wonder, I hope for the Leafs' sake, and it seems plausible that there's going to be this first tier of guys that go off the board on the wing that they can't afford, and then they're going to be sitting there going, we can give you a short-term contract and a little bit more than what you get on the long AAV, but you're signing a 2-year deal here, and then bumping up your value, getting the Toronto spotlight, getting potentially a little bit of power play time, getting some Matthews opportunity, knowing that there's going to be open spots too, potentially with Marner gone, and how this is going to kind of shake out moving forward, and say, this is your best shot at hitting free agency again and then getting that dream contract.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be the pitch, and the agents and the players out there, they can see it. They can see the path where it makes sense. So I think that's going to happen. And I don't even know, different than defensemen, I don't even know if on the wingers you're going to have to go higher in the AAV. I think that they can get a deal.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So,
I think that you're going to overpay for the goalie, you're going to overpay on the blue line, but you're going to get a decent number for a winger, and that's going to be the Leafs offseason. And then a depth defenseman, again, Edmondson being the most likely of the guys and probably the highest value target of the guys. And there you go. And that's your 2024-25 Toronto Maple Leafs, returning the core with different pieces around the fringes and the promise of 2025's cap
pumped.
space.
Yeah, we have a whole season of
hell yeah, baby. That's the one. Hey, the Leafs and the scraps. That's going to be it. And not even, the idea of, hey, it's going to be the tougher guys and the legacy guy like Max Domi who could end up being gone. Anyway, I think we hit everything and we're up against it. Thanks, James. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Thanks.
See you, buddy.